In Ireland, in the Irish Parliament of the Dáil, they've been debating new hate speech and hate legislation. There's a lot of different opinions on it. To get a really good view of, or a good broad view of the opinions on it, you have to go both to the House of Representatives, as you might say, the Dáil, for listening to what TDs have to say, but also to go to the Irish Senate to listen to what some senators have to say. We're going to play a few videos of what Irish politicians have said about these hate speech laws in the Dáil and the Senate over the last week. I'm going to start off with the minister that's presenting these laws to the Houses of the Oireachtas, Helen McEntee, the Minister for Justice, and her positive description of the hate speech laws.
Members of minority and vulnerable communities have spoken time and time again about the horrendous and unacceptable prejudice, contempt and hostility that they face on a daily basis. They've been targeted, they've been subject to horrific abuse and attacks simply because of their identity. When we hear about these incidents, the victims are commended for their courage in speaking out and drawing attention to the discrimination and the hatred that they face. But this is no longer good enough. Giving people a pat on the back, these communities deserve to be protected, their identities and cultures celebrated, and to live without fear of victimisation simply because of who they are. Many individuals of our country live their lives hiding part of themselves, modifying their daily routines, changing the way they dress, the way they speak, the way they present themselves to the world, all in order to avoid being targeted. This is not the vision that I have for this country, nor I think many others. It is not the tolerant society that we want to live in. This new legislation will contribute in a very fundamental way to allowing everybody in Ireland to live without fear as they live the most authentic version of themselves.
That's from the Department of Justice. Her description of the hate speech laws sound progressive, humane, ethical, and maybe something that's needed. What I'm saying is, from her particular description of those laws, I come from a minority myself. I won't go into any details about it, but I remember as a teenager with my mother in town one time, somebody calling me names, and how shameful I felt about it, and the general shame that I felt for a period of years growing up. So I can see the justification behind hate speech laws. The leader of the Aontú political party in Ireland has some concerns that those laws might be misappropriated, might be misapplied. And so he did ask a question to which I have tried to get the answer, and I haven't been able to find it over the last day or so. But I am going to continue looking, and I hope to be able to bring the answer to this Dáil question to you next week.
Now, Minister, do you believe that women who say that a woman is an adult female, but that's transphobic, do you believe that that's hate speech? And would you say that it's possible that a judge in future might have those views and implement your legislation on the back of that? That's a really important question. I think that we have to get to. I do think that there has been a significant shift in the political bubble in recent times in relation to these ideas. I think that the government have taken a policy currently of gender affirmation. I spoke to a teacher recently who told me that he attended an in-service day, and a person from his department had told him not to use the words mother and father in class anymore, that those words were not inclusive words. If you go onto the NCCA website, which provides sources for teachers to be able to deal with these issues in school, one of the pieces of advice states that teachers should not call to attention the class by using the words boys and girls, because again, that those words were not inclusive. We saw the government, very recently in legislation, delete the word woman from legislation. Obviously, it was put back in because there was an outcry throughout the country at the bubble, because the bubble didn't understand what, how angry people were, and the government responded to that. But we also saw the HSE develop leaflets in terms of cervical cancer, which spoke of women as people with a cervix. And many women do not want their identity to be deleted in terms of that. So it's, that ideology that is at the heart of government policy at the moment. Many people are fearful that this bill will be used to delete the opportunity of people to speak respectfully and openly against that particular ideology.
Senator Ronan Mullen in the Irish Senate also expressed concerns about how this new hate speech laws will be applied in Ireland.
It's the real test of our tolerance as people is our willingness to accept and take on board that people will express points of view. It's not the people who trenchantly express points of view that we agree with. That's not where the test of our tolerance and liberalism is. It's when we kind of passionately disagree with those people. And it's in that context that I want to note the publication and the soon to commence discussion in the Dáil of the Criminal Justice Incitement to Violence or Hatred and Hate Offences Bill 2022. I think this is a very important piece of legislation. I think it's very important that we scrutinise it carefully. I note, for example, that following recommendations that I would have made directly to the Department of Justice, I'm glad to see Section 11, which provides for a direct recognition of freedom of expression and provides that discussion or criticism of matters related to a protected characteristic, where a contribution to debate or material or behaviour is solely that mere discussion or criticism of matters related to protected characteristics cannot be caught by the legislation. And this is important because in striking the balance between freedom of expression and prevention of incitement to hatred in our society, the balance can be got wrong. And I want just to note very briefly and in conclusion, the UN Secretary General has discussed this. The Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Ilse Brands-Keres, has pointed to the danger that, for example, disinformation can get used as a pretext to intimidate and harass critical voices, and that states sometimes get it wrong when they clone other countries' legislation in this area, where governments respond to public pressure by rushing in with simple solutions for complex problems. Thank you. I just wanted to put that on the record.
Yeah, sure.
It's really important that we scrutinise this legislation carefully in the coming weeks to see does it indeed get the balance right.
It would appear as though Senator Mullen is satisfied enough with the contents of the bill and the protections therein to protect free speech. But it is worrying that at least one member of the Irish Parliament, of the Dáil, who's also a member of the governing political party, seems to think that it can be used against people who question issues like the COVID regulations that were applied over the last number of years. This is Alan Farrell.
In a country that has been defined by economic social progress in recent decades, it can be easy for society to become complacent to things will only continue in this trend. However, this is not always the case, and the forces of division and extremism are relentless in their efforts to pursue an alternative agenda. In fact, I think some members will probably agree that over the COVID period, there was a certain element of denialism which crept into Irish society. And I could say that it rose quite significantly since then. And I'm sure that other members have received emails over the last few weeks by some of the very same constituents who voiced concerns about lockdowns, masks, vaccines, among other things, who have now turned their attention to this particular bill.
Okay, so overall, what's your view on this, Padraig, from hearing what our politicians have had to say over the last few days?
There's a relationship between what has been said there and what I was speaking about earlier about feeding into a far right narrative. It does appear like that it is quite beneficial for a bogeyman to be created to blame all your problems on. It isn't to say that there isn't an element of far right, and what the last speaker there is basically saying, like, I'd love to put the question to him: is it hate speech to discriminate against people who weren't vaccinated, people who couldn't be vaccinated for whatever reason? Was a hate speech then, like when radio stations, people were coming on and putting people down as super spreaders and killing grannies and all this type of stuff? So there was a lot of language flying around back then It's quite contradictory to be bringing hate speech in and mention it in the context of COVID. To be like for one observation, the other observation I'd have, Finbar, is when the minister is speaking about drafting this legislation on hate speech, you get the impression, if you're a total outsider to the country, that this is a very intolerant society that we live in. Well, that's not my experience. I think Ireland is quite liberal. I think it's quite diverse, quite accommodating. I don't see those type of social issues, to be honest with you. Like, and I've children growing up, and it's not really a thing where we're not seeing this level of discrimination that warrants a ramp up in legislation, in my view. I mean, we've already had legislation in place for incitement to hatred. There are laws already there. Are they inadequate? Has there been a proper study done to say we are, deficient in this area? To me, this is another example of really creating a fuss in a certain area for. It's hard to determine what reason, but this isn't the focus of society today. This isn't the biggest problem in society today, in my view.
I suppose some people might say we're middle-aged white men, Irishmen, and as such, maybe we're not experiencing that discrimination. So my overall concern is that this will be interpreted as anti-Semitism is popularly understood now. So now if you criticize Israeli political policy with regards to expansionism into Palestinian lands, etc., you're actually labelled, as we can see what happened with Jeremy Corbyn and so many others, you're labelled as being anti-Semitic, and thus that's a form of hate. And I'm just concerned that these laws could be abused. As much as Senator Mullen appears to be calmed and consoled with the protections that appear to be in this law, I think what would be most useful to ourselves and to our viewers is if we review this law ourselves next week. If we myself and yourself, Padraig, have a read over it over the week, and we come back to our viewers and let them know what we think personally ourselves, rather than listening to second-hand information from politicians. Does that sound like an idea?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.